Welcome to part 3 of Lechmere and the Whitechapel Murders. To recap, in part 2 we looked at the first two of the so-called canonical murders, that of Polly Nichols and Annie Chapman. We didn't investigate every issue suggesting Lechmere's guilt in that exercise because we're primarily focusing on the geographical aspects. In future episodes I'll go back over some of these details in depth, and some of them have actually been raised by some of the viewers already. Today I'll examine the so-called double event, the murders of Elizabeth Stride and Catherine Eddowes on the 30th of September 1888. So I've rejigged the Ordnance Survey map, the Victorian Ordnance Survey map, because the double event is complicated enough without all the other pieces on the map. And now we're going to look back at Donald Swanson's stolen list of Whitechapel murders from Scotland Yard. We see for 30th September 1 AM for Liz Stride and 1:45 AM for Catherine Eddowes, just here. This draws attention to one glaring fact, but some people dispute that Liz Stride was a Ripper victim, as she only had her throat cut. All these crimes were investigated to see if they were domestics. The police were not totally stupid and knew that nearly all murders were domestics, and nearly all were actually solved. In every case, the possibility of them being a domestic was eliminated. It was exceptionally rare for a woman to be murdered by having a throat cut. The crime scene for Liz Stride was similar to the other Ripper victims. The class of victim was the same. The general location was similar in the East End, and it was 45 minutes before the next murder, which was just enough time to allow the perpetrator to get from one crime scene to the other, find his victim, go to the actual scene of crime, being taken to the scene of crime, killing the victim, escaping, and for that victim to be found by the police. 45 minutes. Almost exactly the sort of time you would expect. The presumption is that the killer was disturbed at the Stride crime scene and had not fulfilled all his sordid murder fantasies, and that led him to kill again, and hence the double event. The vociferous voices that like to claim Stride was unconnected to the Ripper series are extremely unconvincing, but I guess some people just like to be contrary. I will obviously start by going through the events surrounding the murder of Liz Stride. She actually lived in Flower and Dean Street, which was over here, in a lodging house, but often drunk in the Queen's Head. The building is still there, although it's no longer a pub here. She was seen that evening leaving the Bricklayer's Arms, which was a pub on Settle Street here, with a man at 11 PM on the evening of Saturday the 29th of September. The Bricklayer's Arms, the building is again still there, but it's no longer a pub. It seems that she did her street soliciting in this area, mostly to the south of Commercial Road here. A lot of prostitutes did their work somewhat distanced from where they actually lived for sort of understandable reasons. And she was seen with several different men going up and down Burner Street here over the next hour and 45 minutes. Perhaps the last sighting was by someone called Israel Schwartz, a recent Jewish immigrant from Hungary who had little or no English. He claimed he saw a woman, who he later identified as Liz Stride, being pushed to the ground near to Duffield's yard, where the body was found actually dead 15 minutes later. Schwartz crossed the road of Burner Street when he saw this altercation taking place, but a man on the corner of Fairclough Street and Burner Street, outside a pub, who lit a pipe, appeared. The first man, a broad-shouldered man who had pushed Liz Stride to the ground, shouted out the word Lipsky. Lipsky was the name of a Jewish murderer who had killed a woman the year before in the neighbouring street, which is Batty Street, which is this street here. And it had caused a bit of a minor sensation. In any case, Schwartz walked off. He thought he was being followed by the man who had lit a pipe outside the pub, and he ran off towards these railway arches. Schwartz told a very similar story to both the police and to a newspaper called The Star. "15 minutes after the Schwartz incident, at 1 a.m, Louis Dimschutz, a commercial traveller, drew his horse and cart into Duffield's yard, which was adjacent to a building which was used by the International Working Men's Education Club, an establishment mainly frequented by Jewish anarchists among the newly arrived Eastern European Jewish migrant community who had made their first settlements in this area because it was adjacent to the docks. The road, by the way, Berner Street, is now called Henrika Street. Louis Dimschutz's pony shied. He prodded ahead with his whip, which touched something soft. He lit a match and saw a woman lying there. He initially thought it was his wife, believe it or not, thought she might be lying there drunk, but when he realised it wasn't, he went into the club for assistance. Several people came out and they realised the woman was dead and they sent for a policeman. The doctor arrived at about 10:15 a.m. and pronounced her dead. Liz Stride had her throat cut but no other wounds. It was presumed that Dimschutz had disturbed the culprit, who had perhaps hidden behind the yard door when his horse turned in, and when Dimschutz went into the club, the killer fled. Was the broad-shouldered man, the man who had pushed Liz Stride to the ground, was he responsible? Possibly, but that was 15 minutes earlier, and that allowed plenty of time for another culprit to come along. And 15 minutes was more than plenty of time for the killer to have completed the full mutilation ritual. So, we're left with a bit of a mystery. Was it the broad-shoulders man or not? I suspect probably not. Now we'll move on to the murder of Catherine Eddowes. At 2 p.m. on Saturday the 29th of September, she left her boyfriend John Kelly on Houndsditch, which is this road here, saying she's going to go to her daughter's in Bermondsey to borrow some money, as she was at that time penniless. On the evening, after drinking heavily and not having gone to see her daughter, Catherine was arrested on Aldgate High Street for being drunk and not able to stand up. So the suggestion is that she had probably been engaged in prostitution to get that money to get drunk. In any case, she was taken to Bishopsgate Police Station by a city policeman. She wasn't even able to stand up. She was taken to Bishopsgate Police Station at 8:45 p.m. By 1 a.m. she was deemed sober enough to leave and she was booked out. She claimed to be going to she claimed her address was Fashion Street, which is over here. But Kelly was actually living in Clarendon Street, the same Clarendon Street, which is here. But she didn't walk in that direction to go there. She didn't turn right out of Bishopsgate Police Station. She turned left down Bishopsgate Police Station, back towards Houndsditch, back towards Aldgate. At 1:35, 35 minutes later, a man called Joseph Lewender said he saw her at the entrance to Church Passage, which is just about here. Lewender was going past with two friends. They'd been in a Jewish social club across the road and were walking past. They saw a lady he identified later as being Catherine Eddowes, talking to a man at the entrance to this passage. At 1:45, 10 minutes later, PC Edward Watkins, whose beat included Mitre Square, which is just off Church Passage, found the totally destroyed body of Catherine Eddowes, totally disemboweled, her face carved up, the most brutally attacked victim so far, laying on her back in a corner, a dark corner of Mitre Square. Watkins raised the alarm and various policemen arrived on the scene quite quickly. Dr. Frederick Gordon Brown examined the body at the scene at 2 a.m. and later conducted the post-mortem, and he found that the womb and left kidney were missing. It might be noted that Annie Chapman, her uterus and bladder had also been removed and were missing. What part this organ removal played in the killer's ritual is open to question. Were they kept as trophies, or was the main object the removal itself, some sort of sick power play, and were they perhaps disposed of soon afterwards? We don't really know, although I'll come back to one aspect of that in a moment. In any case, the night was not over. Teams of policemen spread out from Mitre Square over the quiet night streets looking for a possible culprit. At around 2:20 a.m, PC House, a city policeman out searching for the murderer, and PC Long of the Met, both separately went down Galston Street without seeing each other. They probably, because their timings weren't exact, but down Galston Street. At 3 a.m, 40 minutes later, PC Long, the same PC, who was temporarily transferred from Whitehall to help patrol Whitechapel, and it was on his first day in Whitechapel, went back down on his new beat, back down Galston Street. This time he noticed in a stairwell of 108 to 119 Wentworth model dwellings a bloody rag. Above the rag was chalked a message which read, "The Jews are the men that will not be blamed for nothing." There are similar but different versions of that writing recorded by different witnesses, but that's the most commonly accepted version. The stairwell where the rag and the graffiti were found is now a very good chip shop called Happy Days that's been tastefully decorated to commemorate these tragic events. The door jamb at the time on which the writing was written, the side of the door, was black, and it was in white chalk, so it was about 4 feet off the ground perhaps, and it looked like perhaps like a blackboard. Wentworth Model Dwellings was only a few years old. It was a pristine block, and was a model dwellings which were used for the more prosperous and respectable working class. It was a neat and tidy block, so graffiti wouldn't have been a place covered in graffiti, put it that way. Nearly all the occupants were also Jewish, so they wouldn't really have tolerated anti-Jewish graffiti there. So this makes it very unlikely that it had been there for any length of time. One of the policemen also commented that it looked fresh. Long wasn't aware of the murders at the time he made this discovery, although he was soon afterwards, and he handed the rag into Commercial Street Police Station up here. It was there found that the rag was actually a missing part of Catherine Eddowes' apron. Catherine Eddowes had had part of her apron cut off from the body, a bloody apron, and that was the rag that was found. So this means that the Ripper had definitely passed by Wentworth Model Dwellings from the scene of crime. The graffiti itself was washed off the wall on the personal instruction of the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, Charles Warren, who attended the scene. He claimed this was to stop an anti-Jewish riot from happening, as there had been some anti-Jewish sentiment fermenting in the East End. He did this over the objections of the city police, who wanted it to be photographed. Mitre Square was in city police territory. The boundary was down here. Galston Street was in Met territory, and that was the cause of this little dispute. But this is one of the conundrums of the case. It's 5 minutes walk from Mitre Square to Wentworth Model Dwellings, and yet the murder happened at 1:45. At 2:20, that's 35 minutes later, House and Long are correct, the apron was not in place. So what did if they're correct, what did the Ripper do in that time? He must have dumped it, must have laid low somewhere and dumped the apron piece afterwards for it to be discovered at 3 a.m. It's one of these little mysteries within the case. We will come back to that shortly. Where did the term the double event come from? Well, up to now, even the name Jack the Ripper was unknown. However, just a couple of days before these two murders, a letter was received known as the Dear Boss letter, which said, amongst other things, "You will soon hear from me with my funny little games, and I want to get to work right away if I get a chance." Bear in mind this was only a couple of days before these murders. It also said, "I shall clip the lady's ears off." I didn't mention that one of Catherine Eddowes' ears had been partly cut off and the other ear cut through. It was signed Jack the Ripper, the first use of that name ever. Some think it was a hoax by a journalist, but I'm not so sure. A postcard known as the Saucy Jackie postcard, in exactly the same handwriting and again signed Jack the Ripper, was sent the day after the murders, claiming responsibility, saying, "Double event this time, number one squealed a bit, couldn't finish straight off." So the term double event was coined by the same person who also coined the term Jack the Ripper. And the first letter was not published before the second letter had been sent. As a postscript to the double event, and while we're on the subject of letters, a letter was received on the 16th of October, which was over 2 weeks after the murders, by George Lusk at his house on Tollet Street. Now, some people get mixed up about the location of George Lusk's house, but it was here on the corner of Tollet Street and Alderney Road, and the building is still there. Lusk was chairman of the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee, a group of civilians who were based at the Crown pub here on Mile End Road. They ran patrols that were trying to find the culprit. The letter read, "From hell, Mr. Lusk, sir. I send you half a kidney I took from one woman, preserved it for you. T'other piece I fried and ate. It was very nice. I may send you the bloody knife that took it out if you only wait a while longer. Signed, Catch me when you can, Mr. Lusk." The half kidney, which was contained in a box with the letter, was examined by a Dr. Openshaw at the London Hospital and found to be human, a left kidney belonging to a heavy drinker from a middle-aged woman. Other investigations showed that the kidney had indications of Bright's disease. Now, Eddowes lost her left kidney, and her remaining right kidney also showed indications of Bright's disease. The section of renal artery attached to the kidney half still roughly matched the part that had been cut from the body. So it seems quite likely that this kidney did belong to Catherine Eddowes, which also means the letter was genuine. Well, what is the Lechmere connection to all of this? The first thing to note is that these events took place in the early hours of Sunday morning. Sunday was the only normal day of rest, the only day off for most people. These were the only murders to take place on a day preceding a normal day off work for the vast majority of the population. They also took place somewhat earlier than in the previous cases we've examined. The first murder was around 1 a.m. Thirdly, it was the first murder to take place south of the two major arterial roads, Whitechapel Road, Mile End Road here, and Commercial Road here. These roads did and still do act as psychological barriers that sort of divide up the community, where people don't tend to cross because they tend to live in this area, in this area, this area. They're roads that divide communities up. They're psychological barriers to interaction. That's no doubt why Liz Stride chose to work here and live over there. Now we notice the mother. This piece here is where Lechmere's mother lived. Lechmere's mother lived with one of his daughters. One of his daughters did not move to his house over here at Dutton Street when he moved away, but stayed for some reason for all her life with his mother. Lechmere's old residence is right here, James Street, where he moved from James Street, remember, to Doveton Street in June of this year of 1888. So this was his old stamping ground, right where Liz Stride was murdered. He had, on the night before his day off, he had good reason to visit his mother and daughter, perhaps even go to a local pub in the area of his old stamping ground around here. The reason why the murder was on a Saturday, why it was south of the commercial road axis, and why it was earlier, just after pubs closed, was because Lechmere was the culprit, visiting his mother, visiting his daughter, seeing his mother with her third husband, her second bigamous husband, Fosdyke. Resentment resulted, and the double event followed on straight away afterwards. Now, when disturbed by Louis Dimschutz after the murder of Liz Stride, where would he go? He had unfulfilled, because he had not managed to commit the full mutilation ritual. Where would he go? He can't go in this way home. He wants to find another victim. His old route to work from his old house to his workplace at Pickford's would have taken him along a route past St Botolph's Church, known as the Prostitutes' Church, a stamping ground of prostitutes, the area where Catherine Eddowes unfortunately had been earlier that evening, and the direction of travel for Catherine Eddowes when she left the police station. So I would submit that Lechmere knew that was a stamping ground for prostitutes, because he had travelled that route many times on his way to work in the early hours of the morning. He knew that would be a place he'd find someone. He went to that area. Unfortunately, he found Catherine Eddowes. What happened next after killing Catherine Eddowes, after she had taken him to Mitre Square, where he was probably seen, possibly seen at Church Passage? The next location of significance is Wentworth Model Dwellings, where the apron piece and the graffiti was found, which is on a direct line back to Lechmere's house at Doveton Street. The trigonometry is perfect for Lechmere as the culprit. There's two issues from this. The graffiti. Some people don't think it was written by the graffiti that was found at Wentworth Model Dwellings. Some people don't think it was written by the Ripper, but it was fresh, and as I said, it was a new block inhabited by Jewish people and would have been likely erased if it had been there for any length of time. The explanation for the Jewish angle, the Jews are the men that will not be blamed for nothing, is quite easy to divine. He had been interrupted by Jewish people, a Jewish man, at Duffield's Yard, next to the anarchist club, the International Working Men's Club on Burner Street. Lechmere had lived in this area virtually all his life. It was the area that was first inhabited from about 1800 onwards by the first waves of Jewish migration. It's not easy, it's not difficult, I should say, to imagine that a man of Lechmere's position would feel resentment against these migrants and project the blame for killing 2 people in one night, Liz Stride and Catherine Eddowes, on the fact that a Jew had disturbed him at Duffield's yard. Psychopathic serial killers often project blame for their crimes onto others. 2 crimes in one night instead of just one, 2 victims instead of one, and he was blaming the Jews for this. And also, don't forget, by the great synagogue, the Jewish social club, Lawenda possibly saw him by church passage as well. The next issue which I'll deal with was that there was potentially that delay, wasn't there? The delay between when the graffiti and the apron was found, between 2:20 when House and Long went past and supposedly didn't see it, and 3 o'clock when Long did find it. Was it the case that they were mistaken, or did the culprit in fact delay by up to perhaps 45 minutes the dropping off of that apron piece? If so, where did he go? Where did the culprit go for those missing moments? Did he linger in the streets? It seems unlikely. There was a wave of city policemen coming out from Mitre Square searching the area. It would have been incredibly risky to linger in the streets while that was going on. But if we wish for there to be a local hiding place and a cubbyhole where the culprit could store stuff, remember Lechmere had been working for Pickford's for 20 years. There were 2 Pickford's depots on the doorstep. There was one just across the road virtually here, and the one at Broad Street where we know he certainly worked, here. He could have perhaps gone to either location to lay low for a while, dumped the apron piece and proceeded home on his axis home. Or maybe, sorry, move that back, or maybe Long and House were just mistaken and it was there all the time. Either way, there's a Lechmere solution to all the problems and conundrums associated with this case. So that's covered the quite complex matters surrounding the double event. In the next episode, we'll be looking at the murder of Mary Jane Kelly. For many people, the most controversial of all the murders involved in the so-called official Jack the Ripper series. Make sure you tune in and make sure you watch that episode as well. Thank you very much, and please subscribe.